Is food addiction real, or is there something deeper at play? Sometimes it may seem as if the whole world is addicted to something. We're addicted to coffee, alcohol, our phones, video games, gambling, and more.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what's the deal? The traditional understanding of addiction is that it has to do with the compulsive use of a substance known to the user to be harmful. Usually there's increased tolerance to that substance, meaning that it takes more and more and more of it to get the same high, as well as withdrawal symptoms. So many people who feel powerless over sugar and white flour, they label themselves as food addicts. They find it especially painful and difficult to grapple with their addiction. After all, alcoholics can stay away from bars, cigarette addicts can stop smoking, gamblers can stay away from casinos, but nobody can give up food. We need to eat to live, and temptation is everywhere in our homes, gas station, mini marts, restaurants, employee lounges, vending machines, the local store. It's everywhere. But is food addiction a real thing? Now, some studies make a case for the reward theory of food addiction, meaning that certain types of foods are associated with increased dopamine levels. Dopamine is the chemical that mediates pleasure and motivation in our brains. The theory is that sugar and other foods activate the release of dopamine in our brains. You eat something sugary or fatty or both, and you get that dopamine rush. Food addiction theory points to changes in the brain as evidence of addiction, which sounds reasonable, right? But wait, there's a lot more to the story. Sugar does change our brains, yet lots of things change our brains. Any activity involving pleasure does so, including laughing, exercise, playing video games, spending time with friends. One study showed that listening to classical music had the same impact on the brain as cocaine. Psychotherapy also changes the brain and can be more effective than medication in some instances. Relationships have a direct impact on our brain. There are many studies that completely refute the notion of food addiction. But what about the studies that show rats prefer sugar to heroin? When given a choice between sugar and heroin, lab rats will go for sugar every time. And at face value, that looks really bad. But think about it. Rats are conditioned to eat for survival. They're not interested in getting high. They're interested in surviving. So naturally, they're going to go for the sugar, which is food, which is what they need for survival, rather than a drug. So remember that we have brains, which are the physical control structures of our bodies, but we also have minds. Our brains do not operate alone, nor do our minds function independently of our brains. And research that focuses exclusively on our brains ignores the powerful influences of our minds, as well as the impact of our culture and society. As for the withdrawal symptoms from sugar, we often experience withdrawals because we expect to. Let me ask you something. If you're a woman, do you get cravings for chocolate before your period? Many women do, and they firmly believe it's totally hormonal, but it's not. It's actually psychological, not biological. A study of Spanish women who do not culturally see chocolate as either forbidden or associated with their menstrual cycle report zero chocolate cravings during their cycle, whereas American women do report those cravings. And again, they truly believe it's biological and hormonal. So in many ways, our cravings and withdrawals are all in our heads. I've had patients who said they are absolutely addicted to sugar and they felt like they were detoxing, and yet later, after treatment, they were able to eat sugar in moderation without that sense of addiction. Their physiology did not change, their minds did. Of course, the science may not matter to someone who feels addicted, like Annette, a single mom who was convinced that she was addicted to sugar. As she put it, "Sugar is my personal crack." When she baked cookies with her children, she made excuses to get those kids out of the kitchen so she could eat cookie batter in private. She felt like a crazy addict who needed a sugar fix. Now, Annette was stuck in an unsatisfying job, and sugary foods provided comfort and distraction from her life. She didn't have enough sweetness in her life, so she turned to sugary foods. Her number one source of fun was food. The more fun we have, the less we need food for that purpose. So Annette changed jobs, took up new hobbies, and baking cookies became something fun to do with her kids. And eventually she could taste the batter or just have a cookie without wanting more. A recovered alcoholic cannot have just one drink. A meth or heroin addict cannot stop at one hit. How was it possible for Annette, the self-proclaimed sugar addict, to eat just one cookie?
Will you please tell me that?
That's because it wasn't about sugar on her brain. When she stopped using food for fun and comfort, she could eat anything in moderation. That had to do with her mind. So food addiction is more psychological than physiological. If you have a sudden craving for foods you know are unhealthy, there's always a reason. And when you recognize the true triggers, which have nothing to do with the substance of sugar, you can master that addictive behavior. The first step to reclaiming your power over food is to identify what's going on in your head and your heart. If you're turning to food, it is not because your brain has formed a physical addiction. It's because your mind is looking for a way to feel better. Even if you automatically eat when you're upset, you can learn to do things differently. And when you implement new ways of supporting and soothing yourself, you stop using food to cope or for fun or whatever. It takes time, but it is possible if you put your mind to it. Let me know your thoughts about this. Drop a comment below.